I'm building a survival game that aims to capture the spirit of the old Australian swagman, surviving in the bush as they travel from town to town. I've been spending a lot of time building out the world the player is to survive in, but not much time building the actual survival mechanics. So the first thing I did for this batch of work was to add this power bar to the game. This will become central to many items in the game, but for now it was to serve the role of determining the force with which the player could throw the very first player item in the game, a commercial style 3-pronged hand spear. This was reasonably straightforward to build out. I just drew a below average looking 3-pronged spear and pinned it to the player's position in the game. And I oriented the spear to wherever the cursor is using the angle between the spear's location and the pointer's location. As I was building this, I ran into this kind of cool bug where I was accidentally redrawing the spear to the screen every frame, which ended up looking like some kind of weird house building feature or something. Next, of course, was being able to throw the spear. Basically, I just trigger a throw when the player releases the power bar and tween the spear to the spot where the cursor is pointing. The speed of the throw depends on the power, and there's also some RNG here, so the spear won't necessarily hit the exact spot the user was throwing to. The further away the target, the less accurate the throw will be. When I add a skill progression system to the game, you'll be able to improve your accuracy by gaining XP. Also, if you manage to get an exact 100 on a throw, your throw gains a significant speed and accuracy bonus. Now, rather than having the player go fetch the spear, it will just return to them automatically, but I added a delay of a couple of seconds so that there is a penalty for missing shots. As you'll see shortly when I introduce the fish, this plays an important role as missing can mean the fish gets away before you have time to get another shot off. Before I added the fish though, I just needed some kind of generic hit mechanism. And for testing this feature, I just made the spear destroy any item it hits. This will be the basis for spearfishing, but in general, I want to give the player as much freedom as possible and didn't want to limit the spear to just a sort of fishing minigame. I wanted the spear to be able to interact with anything, and I can add special interactions for any item I like. For now, this is pretty basic, but any item in the game you hit with the spear will shake, and if you hit something like a stick or a log, it will actually push back that item a little bit. I'll also probably do things like if you hit a branch with a spear or an axe, it will break into smaller pieces. When I implement the XP system, hitting anything with the spear will also grant XP, so whilst you'll gain more XP actually fishing, you could set up a little target practice at your camp if you wanted. So playing around with the spear for a little while was actually pretty fun. You may notice that I've added a little bit of juice to it by having the screen shake when the user throws the spear, and overall it was feeling pretty good. But then I needed to implement the fish so that you could actually do something productive with the spear. The fish will be an item in the game just like everything else, but none of the other items in the game move around or react to the player. This will be the first item in the game with some sort of intelligence, but not the last. The basic approach I take with most things in my game to keep everything modular and reusable is to create these TypeScript mix-ins that I can attach to my classes. For example, I have this combustible mix-in for items that can catch on fire, and a movable mix-in for items that can be moved by the player. These mix-ins make things much more composable than a more typical style of class inheritance. In this case, I figured I would create a swim behavior mix-in that would cause this item to move around with a sort of fish swimming behavior, and an avoid behavior mix-in that would alter the item's movement such that when the player is close, it will run away. Although this will be tailored to the fish initially, these will then be easily reusable for other wildlife in the game. Speaking of tailor and fish, I first created another quick asset to serve as the art for the fish, which is supposed to be a tailor. Then I got started with the avoid behavior, which was simple enough. It reacts to the player's current position, and when it gets within a certain range, there is a chance of the avoid behavior being triggered. The closer the player gets, the more likely the avoid behavior is to trigger. The swimming behavior was a bit trickier to implement, especially since it needs to work in combination with the avoid behavior. But the basic idea I settled on is that I pick a random spot, which will be restricted to the ocean area, and then calculate a normal vector from the fish's current location to that target spot. Then for some period of time, I will add that vector to the fish's position on each update. I also added a very simple tween animation to the fish to give it a bit of a swimming motion. Wherever possible, I'm trying to avoid having to create pixel art animations manually, which would be a pain to do for every single type of fish. And it also probably means I'd end up adding less fish to the game, and although this is pretty basic, I think it looks convincing enough. I also only have pixel art for the fish facing in one direction, because when the fish is swimming in the other direction, I just flip the image around. So now the fish will just swim, and the closer I get to it, the more likely it is to quickly swim away and avoid me. Since the fish only react to the player moving, you can also try the patience strategy of standing still and waiting for the fish to come close to you before throwing the spear. It feels adequately frustrating. I want it to be hard to get a fish. With the delay of the spear resetting, often you will only get one good shot off. Do you risk trying to get a little closer and the fish swimming away, or do you take the long shot? For now, I am also spawning quite a lot of fish, but in future I'll probably make fish appear much more rarely, making that decision all the more important. When you do actually manage to hit the fish, I basically just destroy that fish item and spawn a food item in its place, which has this cookable mix-in attached to it. So now I can catch a fish in the water and pick it up and bring it back to the shore, where I can start a fire and actually cook up the fish. The cooking process connects into my normal fire spreading mechanic, where items that are on fire apply heat to their neighboring combustible items. But in the case of a cookable item, as opposed to a combustible one, it can receive heat events, but it won't actually emit any heat of its own. It also has its own state machine to track the various stages of cooking, so all we need to do is place it near the fire and it will finish cooking once it has reached an appropriate level of heat for long enough. If we leave it near the fire for too long, it will become burnt. The cooking effects are very basic for now. It just emits a bit of smoke whilst it cooks and gets a bit darker and glows when it is cooked. Also, you can't actually eat the food yet. I'll improve this in the future, but the basic structure is there already. I've sped this up just for demonstration, but I'll also probably make it so that cooking a fish will take around 1 to 2 minutes of real time. So it might make sense to try to catch more fish while you wait or do some other activity, but then you also risk burning the fish if you don't pay enough attention to it. Or you could create a strategic fire that would burn long enough to cook your fish, but not long enough to burn it. As much as possible, I want to keep creating these sort of mechanics that interact with each other and enable creative play and experimenting. I will of course expand upon this spearfishing mechanic in the future, with different types of spears, more fish, different fish behavior, and even diving for fish, but I think this is a pretty good start. If you found any of this interesting, a like or subscribe before you go would be greatly appreciated, and I hope to see you back here again for the next video.